What's the price of fame? Cause I could taste it. So I'm chasing and I'm facing a little Hennessy. It might be good for me.
Barou and Shidou are going to show Isagi how to interact with short-term goals for Shidou and long-term goals for Barou. But to understand why I'm saying that each character represents a different term of goal, you need to break them down. So for Barou, Barou's shooting zone is around 29 meters out from the goal. Long distance. So we're going to call this a long-term goal. And Shidou's is anywhere inside of the box, very close to the goal, obviously, so we're calling this a short-term goal. Now, to go a little bit deeper into why I think they set different term goals, is because Shidou doesn't necessarily hold himself to the same level of standard that you see Barou doing. Shidou is more focused on what he wants to do, what he wants to create. He has more of an artistic mind when it comes to setting goals. It's not necessarily about him proving his superiority over another person per se, it's about carving proof of his life into the world. While Barou, on the other hand, has a very high standard that he set for himself, being the king of the field. And how he views that standard is, if I want to live my own way, I'll just have to blaze a trail with my own strength. You can kind of think of this as being the restricted way of setting a goal, because with long-term goals, you are kind of restricted to that one long-term goal. But on the other side, with freedom egoists or short-term goals, because this side is more quantity over consistency, you are free to choose a lot more short-term goals. And that being said, if you do get stuck on one of your short-term goals, you can just change it. Again, comparing that to long-term goals, you are restricted to that one long-term goal. If you want to change that one long-term goal, you kind of have to rethink quite a lot. So moving forward in this video, Barou is going to represent the restriction of long-term goals, and Shidou is going to represent the freedom of short-term goals. I'm not necessarily saying that one's better than the other, it's literally just which one works best for your ego type or you as a person. But to elaborate on this whole short-term, long-term thing, you need to look at their shooting styles as well. Barou has a very consistent shot that he shoots from 29 meters out. It goes roughly to the exact same spot every single time. It's a very consistent shot. So if you're looking at long-term goals, to achieve long-term goals, you need consistency more than anything. Let's say, for example, Barou's long-term goal is that he wants to run a 5-kilometer marathon. If he actually wants to achieve that goal, he's got to be very consistent in his training and how he approaches his goal. He's got to train every day, or basically every day, and he's basically got to map out what he's actually doing. If we was to go and apply that rough same goal to Shidou's short-term goals, Shidou's short-term goal would simply just be to run more. It wouldn't be, I need to run a 5-kilometer marathon. It would just be, oh, I want to run more, so I'm going to run more. It's not necessarily focused on consistency, it's just a slight change to how you do stuff now to achieve something later on. So where Barou has to train roughly the same amount of time for each week and be very consistent in that training, Shidou's is a lot more loose, it's a lot more free. He might only run twice one week and then 5 times the week after, because the goal that Shidou set for himself is simply to run more. It's a short-term goal, it's easier to achieve than Barou's long-term goal. Because where Barou's shot style is focused on consistency and getting it to the exact same spot, Shidou doesn't have a consistent shooting style. He shoots with his left foot, with his right foot, headers, over his head, literally anywhere with any body part. And that's because short-term goals can be about fucking anything. Not only that, but if you're setting short-term goals for yourself, you usually need to set more short-term goals than the one long-term goal. This is also part of the reason why I was saying that Barou only had 3 goal formulas, which were way more polished, while Shidou only had 4 that was less polished. Because Barou works better long-term and is more consistent, while Shidou works better short-term and has more options. Again, one of them isn't necessarily better than the other, because in terms of bids, they're basically the fucking same. It's just, how do you approach your goal and how do you break your goal down? Do you break it down to short, achievable goals that you can get dopamine off and essentially snowball your motivation into being something that can then achieve a goal? Or are you very consistent in how you approach that goal? And even when you wake up some days and don't want to do a specific thing, you force yourself to do it. Because you know that if you want your long-term goal to be achieved, you need consistency more than anything. So then, third and finally, is how they improve as characters. Barou improves by not changing his shot style whatsoever. I know you could kind of say that the double nutmeg is a different shot style, but I'm putting it under movement, because he baited Isagi and Kaiser over to this way to then shoot between them. But Barou improves by changing how he approaches his goal in the first place. Does he make a direct run? Does he change his direction? Does he let somebody else hold the limelight? Does he bathe in the chaos? These are all different ways that Barou is reaching for his goal. He's not changed the consistency part or what his goal is to begin with. He's just changed how he gets there in the first place. You can kind of think of this as Barou's mentality, right? Barou at the start of Blue Lock only had this essentially straight charge. He wanted to be the king, he made a direct run to be the king. And by the second selection, we see that Barou isn't as dominant as he used to be. So instead of passing the ball to Isagi a second time, he instead changes his approach. And technically speaking, I'm pretty sure he uses Isagi as a feint. The very fact that he's gone from making a direct charge to where he wants to be to then using the shadows of other people to cover himself, that's changing how he's applying himself to his goal. And then you have the Lorenzo counterattack, the stealth kill shot, and the double nutmeg. I mean, fuck it, I might as well explain it, right? The Lorenzo counterattack is him just completely giving the light to somebody else. This is the same character that wants to be the main actor of the field. He is now fine passing the ball over to somebody else to carry it up the field to pass it to him. By the way, if that sounded like Barou downscale, I was literally just talking about how he normally likes to have the attention, but now he's happy to have somebody else take the limelight. That's literally Barou changing his mentality of how he's applying himself to his goal. And then the stealth kill shot is Barou quite literally just bathing in the chaos. While everyone's confused about what's going to go on, he knows exactly what he wants to do and he stays focused in that. That's again why we're talking about Barou being long-term goals. Because while everybody else is in this chaos part, being very confused about what their short-term or long-term goal is, even the goalkeeper, Barou stays focused and just fucking pings it right to the side. And then on the flip side, for short-term goals, you have Shidou. And instead of Shidou changing how he approaches his goal, he changes what his goal is altogether. Because Shidou's goals are kind of short-term goals, it's not a matter of how he approaches the goal. Because obviously it's an easier goal to achieve, it's based more in what he can actually do. So we're not really asking Shidou to change how he gets to the goal zone. What we're actually asking Shidou to change though is what his goal is, i.e. what the short-term goal is. Because let's say for example, Shidou only scores headers. If he only scores headers, his short-term goal is basically the exact same. So if he's scoring them, he's not really achieved or evolved as a person. My hair's fucked up because playing with it is quite literally a stim. I'm just going to continue. But with Shidou representing short-term goals, it is about him changing what the goal is altogether. Because the moment he starts repeating any of them, he's not evolved, he's not changed, he's not doing anything different. While for Barou, we're not asking him to change his goal or his shot style. What we are focused on though is how he applies himself to that goal. So with that being said, Shidou and Barou are going to show Isagi how to interact with his short-term goals and his long-term goals. Because when you think about what Isagi's been doing in Blue Lock so far, his long-term goal up here has been being the number one in Blue Lock. His short-term goals have been, let's say, passing to Kunigami in the first selection, figuring out the direct shot, protagonism, metavision, blah blah blah. But now Isagi has one issue. He doesn't have a long-term goal. And the reason why I think that Isagi doesn't necessarily have a long-term goal kind of comes from Ego's brainwashing. Ego says when he's introducing himself and Blue Lock to the players, the last remaining person will become the best striker in the world. So I kind of want to say that Isagi was under the impression that as soon as he became the number one in Blue Lock, he would be a very dominant player. But not only that, his long-term goal was being the number one striker in Blue Lock, because that would then achieve his dream, no? So, you can essentially think of Isagi's long-term goal at the start of Blue Lock was to be the last remaining player in Blue Lock. Again, his short-term goals were the stuff that he acquired. Protagonism, metavision, direct shot, two-gun volley. They are all short-term goals that are essentially climbing up to this level. And that's why, by the end of the NEL, when Isagi's crowned number one, that's why he's got such a big hubris in the Nigeria game, because he believes that he's going to be very dominant as a striker now. Because of what Ego said to him about being one of the last remaining players, and now that we've essentially finished eliminating people, we are done with the elimination phase. And since Isagi's crowned as number one, he probably thinks that he is going to be close to the best striker in the world. Or he's at least got the foundations to climb up there easier. But what this game against France is showing Isagi is that he's nowhere near as dominant as he originally thought he would be. That's why in the Nigeria game, he never questioned his ego, but now he is. Now his goal formulas don't just completely dominate every person. Now he can't transcend the field in the first 4 fucking seconds. Isagi is finally playing against a team that's actually better than him. Because for a lot of the times in the matches that Isagi plays in, he is equal to or has the better team. Obviously, with the exception of like the first selection, maybe his second selection. Third selection, he did not play against Shidou and Rin. The U20 game, the only real people on that team were Sai, Aiku, and Shidou. And Sendao, maybe Fukaku. NEL, Bastard Munchin without Isagi on it was one of the best teams in the NEL. And then the Nigeria game, he was playing against a bunch of fucking bots. Now he's playing against an actual world-class team. How he used to approach stuff doesn't work the same. Again, to kind of elaborate on why I don't think Isagi has any short-term or long-term goals, this is why he doesn't have a long-term goal. He thought he would be a lot more dominant as a player by now. Not only that, he probably expected that the team around him would be much better. Not to say that I'm not saying that people in Blue Lock are bad or anything like that. Obviously, Isagi probably set a much higher standard for where he'd be at the end and who would be around him at the end. So then, how that translates over to this graph again is that because Isagi doesn't really have a long-term goal in mind, he can't really set short-term goals because what is he really aiming for? And I know you could say that Isagi's long-term goal is still to be the best striker in the world, but Isagi doesn't know that. He stood there questioning what is happening in Blue Lock. I cropped the fuck out of this panel so you can't necessarily see it, but he also thinks that Hugo has a bigger ego than he does. And he's even questioning what he should believe in. So this version of Isagi cannot set any long-term goals because he doesn't even know what to believe. So because he can't set any long-term goals, he can't really set any short-term goals either. So I imagine the shakeup that these two are going to provide to Isagi is how to start from creating short-term goals that eventually snowball into a long-term goal. Because if you take Shidou, for example, Shidou has done this before. It's not necessarily explicit, but the long-term goal was to score a diving header. Might as well just quickly break it down. But you see here, Shidou tried this short-term goal in the U20 game. He does a diving header, and you see in that panel there, it doesn't fucking work. So then Shidou reevaluates what that short-term goal is to just scoring a header, which he then does, fast-forwarding to the Barcha vs PXG game. So, I want to say Shidou took the information from the first attempt and the second attempt to then change his approach for how he does the third attempt. Because what he's essentially done with the short-term goal here is split up how it happened. He was being marked by about 3 people and he tried a diving header. He took the 2 parts of that goal that failed, being marked and trying a diving header, and split them across 2 different goal formulas. This one is just a simple header while he's being marked by 3 people. I guess the goalkeeper counts here for some reason. If you compare that goal to this goal, he's being marked by 3 people here too. I guess the goalkeeper's not here, but again, putting our fucking tinfoil hats on. So because he's took the man marking side away from trying to do this diving header, if that makes any sense, he's now just focused on trying to do the diving header, which is why the formula behind this goal is a very unexpected run for him to then jump and do a diving header unmarked. The long-term goal for Shidou, I imagine, was scoring a diving header, which is what he was first attempting here. But he had to split that across other short-term goals. And then for Barou, Barou's example is in the NEL. Barou's long-term goal was to crush Isagi and usurp Ubers, essentially. But what does he do with that first long-term goal? He doesn't necessarily act on it straight away. In fact, when he goes to Ubers, he rejects Snuffy's ideology, which is Barou kind of being arrogant to his own long-term goal, which he then changes how he applies himself. Instead of completely rejecting Snuffy's ideology, he settles and says, sure, let's work together for now. But him working with Snuffy was only a short-term agreement. I know this is kind of different from a goal, but I've been trying to explain this genuinely for like the past 3 days and I've been struggling on the wording, so I'm just fucking sending it. But Barou then takes the short-term goal of accepting whatever Snuffy's ideology is to then learn Predator Eye and the stealth kill shot, which he then benefits off to then achieve his longer-term goal. I guess my example for Barou taking short-term goals for his long-term goal isn't necessarily the best. I'm not going to hold you on that one. But again, you can see kind of Barou accepting these short-term goals, like when he passes to Nagi in episode Nagi, so they score against Kyora's team, I think, when they're seeing the Isagi Phantoms. That was kind of just Barou focusing on the short-term goal of beating Phantom Isagi, because he fucking passes. And in fact, you can see when he passes to other players like Chigiri in episode Nagi. They're all times when Barou's accepted this shorter-term goal in pursuit of the long-term one. My first example might have not been the best, but you can go and look through Barrow's character. But I've had some people say to me, do you really think Barrow and Shidou are going to score in this second half? Abso-fucking-lutely I do. So first, let me break down why both of them need to score. Shidou's is a lot easier, so I'm gonna do Shidou's first. For the entire time that we have known Shidou, we have not explored his character whatsoever. We don't know his backstory. We kind of know his true ego, even though that was like a brief, 2 panels. And we've had many people at the high level interested in him. So I kind of want to say all of Shidou's story parts so far has been leading up to this game for him to do something amazing. In fact, even before this game started, Charles said, huh? Shidou-chan isn't playing today either? And then when Bachara says, yeah, he's on the bench, Charles goes, really? We're gonna wipe the floor with you guys. So Charles has so much confidence in Shidou's ability to play football that he thinks that if Japan doesn't play him, it's going to be a fucking clean sweep for France. This is also taking into account what Sai was saying about Shidou. The very fact that Sai picked Shidou out of everybody in Blue Lock kind of says a lot too. Sai doesn't even say, oh, I'm partially interested in this guy. He says, I want your ego. Go berserk for me. You know, after also pointing out that Blue Lock is a cage much too small for a character like Shidou. Not only that, right, but at halftime of the U20 game, Sai's about to up and fucking leave. The only way Aiku managed to keep Sai there still was because Shidou was there. He was like, oh, do you not want to see what, you know, number 11 or whatever the fuck number he was can do? And Sai was like, oh, I guess so. I guess I'll see. He was cheesing the entire time, bro. Not only that though, but Shidou's philosophy does kind of play into Hugo's philosophy. Because Shidou's philosophy is quite literally, I was born to do this. I'm going to do this. Hugo's philosophy is people should only do stuff in their aptitude. But if Shidou is stating, for me, it just so happens to be football, when we're talking about carving proof of your existence into the world, he needs to play this game and score with Hugo's yap. After Charles's glaze, after Sai's glaze, after Noah being panicked about what Shidou and Charles are going to do in the PXG game, after all of that upscale, he needs to play, and I'm not going to lie, he kind of needs to score too. It might be because he is my favorite character, and I do hold him to a very high standard, and I've been waiting a very long time for this. I hope to God Shidou scores to this game, because I've been waiting for fucking years to explore this nigga, bro. And it might be because he is my favorite character and I do hold him to a high standard, but I don't expect Barrow to score 2 goals as well. In fact, this can be my segue over to Barrow. Barrow needs to score 1 goal. I'm not holding him to the same standard as Shidou. Not for any particular reason. It's just that I feel like Barrow has demonstrated how good he is as a striker. Shidou, we've low-key been waiting this entire fucking time. But if Barrow gets played now and he doesn't score, what was the actual fucking point of putting Barrow on the field? If Barrow's job was just to support Shidou, then why didn't you sub in Zantetsu or Raichi or anybody fucking else? Why would we sub in a striker of Barrow's ego, by the way, just to tell him, you're not actually going to score this game. You need to help Shidou, though. I would be thoroughly disappointed if Barrow got played and didn't get a single goal. And I know for a fact Croc would not be happy with that shit. He's waited, what, like 2 years to see his favorite character get played and they don't score? As funny as that crash out would be, there's no way. There's actually no way. Because it's also the same reason why I'm like, if he doesn't score, I'm going to fucking lose it. But I guess another reason why I expect Barrow to score is to ultimately kind of prove Hugo's philosophy wrong. You already know what I'm gonna say, if I'm being honest. Hugo says, if you saw a lion trying to fly, anyone would think it's foolish. And we all know Barrow's ego, or aura, is a lion. Although Hugo's saying that it would be foolish to watch a lion try to fly, Barrow has already scored a header before. In fact, he's scored 2 headers so far. You've got this one in the first selection against Isagi's team, and then you've got him again in the first selection against Nagi's team. And, I just wanna, just look at that. It's even pointing in the same fucking direction. If I was to expect anybody to shatter Hugo's philosophy when it comes to football, it would be Barrow. I guess you could also make the argument for Rin, but considering that he's not doing much this game either, we're gonna take Barrow instead. A person with so much ego, grit, and determination that it doesn't even matter what he's supposed to do. He has the ego to shape his own destiny. It doesn't matter what he's supposed to do, what he's supposed to be good at, what he's supposed to be bad at. Barou wants to do something and his ego's telling him to do it, he's going to shape that reality to fit the narrative. And then, obviously, on the other side, because I might as well dabble over to Shidou now, Shidou might not have the ego to bend reality because, obviously, he's an egotistical person, but the vibe between him and Barou is different. But at the same time, you cannot limit Shidou to one single version of nature. While, yes, we are talking about football being his natural thing to do, how he plays it is very unconventional. Bicycle shots, back heel shots, lefty shot, righty shot, headers. You cannot limit Shidou to one way of shooting. So yes, they both need to play, they both need to fucking score. I high-key expect Shidou to get at least 2 goals though. It might fuck up the scores or whatever, but at the same time, we've been waiting a very long time to see him do something. Barou, we already know is a very good striker, so I'm not holding him to the exact same standard. So then, the final question then is who's gonna score first? If I'm being completely honest, at this point, I don't even fucking care anymore. If Barou scores, that means that Croc gets to change his profile picture, thank God. Maybe we'll even get a Hiyori sub. And if Shidou scores first, Shidou scored. But setting aside the positivity, Shidou needs to score first. Because the entire time that we've seen Shidou, he's always scored the first goal when he's played in that half. If you go back to the third selection, I'm fairly certain Shidou scored first. U20 game, when he gets subbed on, he scores first. Hell, even if you go back to the second selection, I'm pretty sure he scored the first goal against Kunigami and Rayo. Then even in the NEL, he scores 9 times out of 10 first. Because even the first game that PXG play in, we see Rin score the final goal, and we know that he got 2. And we know that Shidou scored that game as well. So Shidou probably scored first, Rin scored the brace after. But then even in the PXG game, he scored first. But my argument's not going to be based in pattern recognition alone. Since we have categorized Shidou's goals as short-term goals, he is going to achieve them quicker than Barou is. Or at least, that's how it should work. Because if you think about it, if you set a short-term goal, it's easier and quicker to achieve than a long-term goal. So not only is there patterns that are in Shidou's favor for Shidou scoring first, but in terms of analysis, it seems like Shidou's going to score first. But to also logically argue some points for Barou, the score is technically 2-1. They're technically in restriction. I know the whole theory about scoring at set times means you're a certain ego type got fucked up by Hiyori, but to be honest, that evolution was Karasu's evolution. That wasn't a Hiyori evolution. Hiyori was just the nigga that scored. The evolution and the driving factor of the goal came from Karasu, and Karasu is a restricted ego type. So with that being said, Blue Lock is still technically in restriction right now. And who thrives the most in that restriction? Barou. Not only that, but in terms of screen time, we've seen Barou less recently. The last time that we saw him touch a ball was his game against Manshine. Ever since then, it's been him questioning what Isagi's going to do in the PXG game, and like 2 appearances throughout the World Cup. So if we're just looking at the environment that we're in, it makes more sense for Barou to score. We're in restriction, he hasn't appeared for longer. Blue Lock needs kind of more of a stable ego to follow. Because while I could make the exact same argument that Blue Lock's going to follow Shidou, Shidou isn't necessarily a good leader, I would say. Barou is obviously the better leader. And considering that Blue Lock is struggling right now to find a leader, it makes sense that Barou could score first. But even though I can make arguments for Barou scoring first, and there is some logic behind it, Shidou has to score first. It's a part of his character, it makes sense in terms of what term goals each of them have set. Shidou's been glazed at the start of the game. We've been waiting for this moment pretty much the entire time he's been introduced. So for all those reasons, Shidou has to score first. It's not even a matter of him being my favorite character. In the spirit of hating on Isagi though, if Barou scores first, I'll change my profile picture to Barou. If Shidou scores first, I'll get back to you on that. But either way, move aside, Isagi. It's time for the actual masterclass. In terms of who's scoring at what time and which goal is going to be better, I have an analysis. I don't think one of them's actually going to be able to be categorized as better than the other. I know it sounds like cope, but stay with me. We'll go with Shidou first. He's already scored against the World 5. Because even though Kaneshiro just didn't fucking show this in the episode Nagi manga, Hugo did explain in the main storyline that Rin and Shidou were the only people to score against the World 5. And who is that right there? Niggas just actually a tanned Igaguri, that's crazy. But if we are actually going to go down the pathway of showing Isagi the long-term and short-term goals, it makes sense for Shidou to score first. You achieve your short-term goals way fucking quicker than your long-term goals. Because that's kind of like the whole point, right? You have to choose more of them, yes, But in terms of like time to achieve, these are quicker. Not only that, but this nigga's literally scored first every single time. Second selection, third selection, halftime at U20. Hell, I even imagine when PXG played against Ubers, Shidou scored first. Rin scores the last goal in that game. So there's a 50-50 chance that he did score first. And what are the odds that Rin scores, Shidou scores, Rin scores again? There are some exemptions though, like for example, the Manshine game and the Barcha game. But the Barcha game was technically split, so that doesn't count. In the Manshine game, he didn't even fucking score. And even PXG scored first. But then my actual argument for why they're going to be equal in terms of goals, I mean Barou and Shidou, is that Shidou is going to score the hardest goal in terms of actually pulling it off. While Loki's obviously going to dominate this game, I don't think he's going to do anything shooting-wise insane. Like, I just don't see Loki doing some acrobatic insane shit. Speed, sure. A lot of his goals are going to be, yeah, if you're fast, you can score that. Then you have Barou, and for reasons that I explained in my other video, breaking them down into long-term and short-term goals. So again, even Barou's goal isn't going to be that hard to recreate. I know that we are focused on recreating goals, but if you recreate a short-term goal, there's no fucking point. And if we're going to have Rin doing shit like this against fucking Nigerian bots, Shidou better pop off. This needs to be a super goal, and it needs to be insane. So in terms of like, you know, how difficult the shot itself was, Shidou's is going to take the cake for that. Then these last 2 points are kind of the same, but they're kind of not because the last one's really complex. But in terms of like storytelling, it makes a lot more fucking sense for us to explore Hugo's philosophy with a striker that kind of follows it, you know, so we can finally see what he's been yapping about. Because so far, he's been hosting a TED Talk. Here it is funny to dunk on Loki for not doing anything. Also not broke a sweat though. Look at Chigiri, look at Karasu. And Charles is just waiting for Shidou to play. So far, we've not actually seen what Hugo's been talking about. So in terms of like story flow, it makes more sense for us to explore it, see it, and then later on, it then kind of sets more of a precedent for when Barou rejects it. Because now we actually kind of understand what Hugo was talking about more. Instead of it just being like, we get Hugo's philosophy, Barou rejects it, and then Shidou's like, you know what, it's actually alright. It makes more sense for us to get Hugo's philosophy, see an explanation, and then set the standard for when Barou rejects it all. Because I'm not gonna lie, I hope Blue Lock gets unrealistic. Give us 2 Shidou goals, 1 Barou goal. I'm an egotistical nigga, I know. I've been waiting a long fucking time to explore this character. Give us a backstory, give us 2 goals. You skipped the World 5 goal. But then for the final point, what Isagi's going to devour from Shidou here when he scores first is how Shidou interacts with his goals. Meaning his philosophy about football. Isagi's probably going to break down how he scores a goal into each like individual piece and then focus on adapting in those specific moments. I know this sounds like so fucking stupid, but think about how Isagi was playing in the U20 game. His goal in the U20 game was built off many attempts. He had a try in the first half, he had like 2 more in the second half. And then it was only after believing in Rin that he finally scored. That was more of Isagi taking this short-term mentality to scoring a goal as a striker. So Isagi's going to devour how you see your goals, how you break them down. And that being our segue over to Barou, what Isagi's then going to devour from Barou's goal is how Barou views himself. The ego and the drive that makes Barou pursue his goals. Even though he would be breaking them down in a different way, the thing that's driving him is more towards Barou's thing. I don't know how to explain this because this is all very hypothetical, but think of it as Isagi's going to devour how Shidou sets goals, i.e. being short-term, but he's going to devour how Barou pursues his goals. Focused more on the driving factor for Barou. But then, going back to the top of the list just to make it easier, Flying Lion Upscale. He has scored a header before with his aura. Flying Lion Upscale. Am I aware that I'm probably putting all of my chips on a random bet? Abso-fucking-lutely. But when you think about it, if Shidou specializes in aerials, and this is going to be a weakness for France, like I've said, they might have a chemical reaction towards the end of the game when Shidou passes to Barou in the air, and Barou fucking slams that shit. Because then we get a chemical reaction of Shidou passing to somebody and them actually doing something with it. Fucking bum-ass Rin. But then maybe for Shidou's goal, that did involve Barou, and we get like a vice versa chemical reaction. Like, Barou sets up Shidou, Shidou then sets up Barou to do this at the end of the game. Or maybe they don't even fucking help each other. But then also talking about the terms of goals that each character represents, if Barou represents long-term goals, it makes a lot more sense for him to score later on. Because again, if we're analyzing when you achieve terms of goals, long-term goals take longer to achieve. It would take longer for Barou to achieve if we're following this pathway. Because with our most recent, this is crazy to say, showing of Barou's ego, if I want to live my own way, I'll just have to blaze the trail with my own strength. But this was following Barou rejecting Snuffy's philosophy. So it would also make a lot of sense for Barou to then be the person that rejects Hugo's philosophy. Because I'm not gonna lie, all of these other points kind of meld into one. Barou's whole fucking flow is rejecting people's philosophies. Whether it was Snuffy's in this game, or even when Ego said to him, in the U20 game, we're gonna want you to do this, don't do that, and he said I wasn't gonna do it anyway. When has Barou ever listened to anybody's philosophy or how they see football? He fucking hasn't. He respects Isagi, but he doesn't view football the same way. Because this is all going to explain why Barou's is going to be better than Shidou's in terms of narrative. Barou's going to score this goal rejecting Hugo's philosophy, bringing the fire back to Blue Lock. Because my prediction for this game is that Shidou's going to score relatively quickly or first, and then Loki's going to start trying after that and just absolutely slam Blue Lock. And it's not even a matter of like, oh, they're not trying or they're not applying themselves. Loki just no-diffs them. But then as Japan's feeling very hopeless, like, yeah, Shidou scored and it was a cool-ass goal, but, like, there's only so much they can do. Barou then scores towards the end or the final goal to bring the hope back to Japan. So in terms of comparing goals, Shidou's was harder to do, but Barou's was more important. Oh, we probably could argue about which one would be better than the other. I don't think it's necessarily going to matter. But then also continuing the story flow, Barou then shows Isagi a person that operates that doesn't follow Hugo's philosophy. Because this is going to be important for Isagi moving forward, because if he does actually delve fully into Hugo's philosophy, he's not going to be the best striker in the world anymore. And while I do think Hugo is right to like a 75% degree, Isagi's going to have to reject something to give him that edge. Maybe that inspiration's brought to him by Barou, the person that rejects that philosophy. Because even when you think about when Isagi awakened, way back in the first selection, funny enough, he awakened kind of as a number 2 here with Barou, because he passed to Kunigame, and then later he goes to learn off Barou to then become the number 1 of his team. So who better to show all of Isagi this than Barou, the person who he's kind of had on this high standard. And then finally, this one isn't even necessarily important to like Barou scoring last. Predator Eye is proof of focus on a long-term goal. Because you're quite literally tunnel visioning on something, you're not focused on all the outside noise. That is quite literally just you focusing on a goal. Because even if you look at the people that do have Predator Eye, they do have a long-term goal. Kaiser wants to be human, Rin wants to destroy Sai, Yukimiya wants to go pro or still be the best striker in the world. Barou's focus on being the king of the field. Hell, even if we're being specific with On's too, he awakened it here. His long-term goal was taking his family to the World Cup, or bringing them out of poverty. Honestly, there is a lot more to this final take. Probably should have put it in his own video. I'll do that. But thanks for indulging my bullshit as always. Never stop updating your world's perspective. Drink water, look after yourself. Peace.